Yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. Hello, WIN family. Welcome to WIN Forum 2020, a whole week to promote gender equality, diversity, inclusion, and innovation. My name is Catherine Barba. I am the founder of the forum, and it's the last day today, but what a day, what a day. We have 4 live talks, and I hope you will be able to attend them all before the weekend. Before anything, I would like to thank our sponsors. Thank our sponsors for making this happen, namely IRI Worldwide, Euler Hermes, Vivendi, BNP Paribas, and Nespresso. Thank you for your commitment to diversity and inclusion. Also, La French Tech here is one of our sponsors, and Kat Burlingame is with us today. Hi, Kat, how are you?
Hi, great.
Good. We are. Thank you for being here. We are together to address a very important topic we are all passionate about, which is closing the funding gap. Closing the funding gap, France, the US, where are we today, what's next? And to discuss it, we have the pleasure and honor to have with us Anne-Claire Legendre, the Consul General of France in New York. Hi, Anne-Claire.
Hi, Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And you're very active in the French Tech, New York and US. And last but not least, Céline Lazorte, our most extraordinary entrepreneur, female entrepreneur in France and co-founder of Sista. Hi, Céline.
Catherine, hello everyone.
Thank you for being with us. So without further ado, I wanted to start the conversation by sharing some figures and elements with you about the funding gap in the US. Please, Anne-Claire, feel free to comment and then I will ask to Kat and Céline to comment on what's happening in France. But here, what I feel after 5 years in the US, I feel that we have made the first step in understanding and admitting the problem. We have started the conversation, but the industry is still a long way from creating equal opportunity for men and women. Just look at those figures. There is a massive gap between the number of men and the number of women who have access to resources, to network, to financial support to start a successful startup. And in the US, so it depends if you see the cup half full or half empty, but yes, it's true that more and more VC funding have female on board. So more and more VC firms have female partners, but the VC funding for females still account for less than 3% of total investment in the US. And there is a figure that is really interesting to me, is that in the US last year, and it's a figure from All Raise, which is the equivalent of Sista here in the US, 54 women were named in VC funds, right? But if you go behind this figure, it appears that only 19 of them were really general partners. So it's a very tiny number. And the other number I wanted to share with you is that 65% of all VC funds in the US have 0 female partners. So there is obviously, my conclusion to this, and I want maybe for you to jump in the conversation, is that yes, the conversation has started. Yes, many people, and we are putting a tremendous amount of energy to move the needle, but we still not have significant results. And my analysis of this is that maybe we fail at involving men in this cause. In the US, it's very much a women for women conversation, and probably we men don't feel it's their fight. I don't know what is your vision there, Anne-Claire, and then Céline and Kat. But so I'll stop sharing this.
Thank you, Kat. I think you said it all. For the US, I think women are still very much underrepresented and completely underfunded. And the figures that you showed are really appalling. And what is more appalling is that they haven't changed. They haven't budged for a long time. We're still in this, brackets where women get something like 2%, between 2 and 3% of the whole VC capital invested in startups. So this needs to change. And I think what we have seen and what has changed in the last few years is exactly on the model of SISTA back in France. And I'm really happy that Céline is here with us to talk about this wonderful example that they are setting in France. We have seen in the US women starting to organize and saying, you know, this is enough and we need to change the situation. I think the two really important points that they made is that we need to know the numbers. And, you know, those figures that you gave were not even known before 2 years ago. So this is already something that we can put up front in this discussion and, you know, create a debate about it. And the second one was the necessity to set targets. And to set targets, I would say, on two different things. First, on indeed the percentage of capital going to female-led startups. And if I can just broaden a little bit the scope, you know, we are talking about female-led startup, but if we look into mixed gender teams, it's not even better. It's only 11% of capital going to startups with mixed gender. So that means that the immense part of the capital is going to teams that don't even include one woman in the team, which is quite amazing. So the first thing is, of course, to increase this percentage of capital going to female-led startup. The second part is really to change the investing industry. And I think that's what we've seen in the US, this change coming more in a way from the investment sector and from the venture capital world, where women started to organize. So you mentioned Allraise. Allraise was created just 2 years ago, and they started to you know, organize, mobilize women, and push for women to be recruited as VC partners or general partners. And you mentioned these interesting figures that they gave in terms of new recruitments that were made in the VC industry. And indeed, for the very first time, there was, you know, 50 more women recruited in 1 year. Was a record-breaking number. So it's still very low. It's only 12% of the partners that are female. But you know, this is a first effort that we see in this industry to change the landscape. We have also seen a large number of impacts, you know, venture capital teams being created. So if you talk about Harlem Capital, trying to fund diversity beyond, you know, women, but also when we talk about diversity, Afro-Americans or Latino funders, BBG Venture, Golden Seed. So you see these VC firms emerging. And I think what we see even more now is, you know, an increased awareness in the investment community that is starting now. You heard about Goldman Sachs announcing last year that they would not work on an IPO if there was no woman on the board. So this is a very important signal. We can, you know, we could say that one female member is not enough on the board to make a real change. But this is, I think, an important signal to the companies that they need to change, you know, their mindsets. And I think we will see more of that, because some you know, trendsetters such as Bloomberg are now creating index that are based on gender diversity. So now people are starting to look at this Bloomberg index for gender equality. And, you know, a lot of companies have not shown a very good result in that terms. And that, of course, has an impact on their reputation and visibility. And I think this is a good signal that things are starting to change. As you say, we are far away from where we want to be.
Yes, we are far away, because initiatives are here in the US, but the results are very low. What's the situation? What would you say about France? Who wants to start, Kat? Or Céline, whoever.
Sure. I mean, you know, I think what's also really interesting, since we're looking at the sort of comparison of France and the US, is how the issue is perceived. In the US, we do have a tendency of looking at things from, you know, with a very strong social justice angle, you know, regarding gender equality and rights and things like that. Whereas, you know, in France, you know, France has traditionally always been very uncomfortable speaking about any form of identity beyond the fact that you are a citizen of the country, whether that has been about race or whether that's been about gender and so on, you know, sexual preference, so on and so forth. And so it's the way that we've been looking at it, at least, you know, in French government, has been regarding almost kind of like optimizing the talent pool. And I know it sounds really cold, but if you look at it this way, you know, the strength of any tech ecosystem depends first and foremost on its talent pool, beyond anything, beyond like the funding and everything, that first and foremost in its talent pool. And what's happening right now is that because all of these barriers exist, whether we're talking about unconscious bias, whether we're talking about funding, or you know, the fact that, you know, young women aren't finding the right career paths very early, is that the country and the ecosystem is completely missing out on some of its brightest and its best founders that could have a really major impact on not just the ecosystem, but on the country you know, as a whole. And I think it's super interesting that we're having this discussion, you know, right in the middle of, you know, we've had the, I mean, you know, I'm pretty sure everyone on this panel has participated in panels of this kind at least like 5 or 10 times before. But what's really special right now is that we're smack dab in the middle of an incredible health crisis.
It's a very special moment to discuss.
Yeah, it's a very special moment because you're going to need every single person you can to rebuild entire economies. And if we don't, you know, if we don't deal with this in a much more forceful way than we have in the past, we're going to miss that turn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Celine, what would you say about this?
I don't want to be the party pooper, but my feeling is that men doesn't still feel the emergency for diversity. So the you know, the pain point is there. And we can still fight as women to get our own, you know, space in the economy, in the medias. But if men doesn't, you know, feel the need of diversity, and then we will still be these poor numbers, or from 2.5 to 2.2, 2.7% of the amount of money of VC raised by women. And I think men should realize that for innovation, diversity is the key. Because if you have everyone around the table who have, you know, the same background, the same unconscious bias, have the same feelings, then we all decide and we all address a problem the same way. So for me, the problem is there, and it's exactly the same in the US, in France, in Europe, everywhere. Mm-hmm. So we need to work together to have, you know, more justice, and also to, yeah, that the leaders should be the reflect of just the society and its diversity.
Yeah, I agree. The main message would be, when women succeed, we all succeed, right? But we still have to work on this collectively together, men and women. Can you, all of the three of you, talk about the initiative that you have taken to improve this, you know, to make things happen? And I wanted to highlight particularly what Celine and Tatiana and Sista has done with Start Her this week, because 2 major organizations have merged. So can you tell us about this, and what is your goal behind this?
Sure. Well, our feeling is that we have to stand together, hand by hands, you know. The motto of Sista is counting women to make women count. And I guess this is our, you know, targets. And we thought that we had to merge with Starter. So Starter is a 10 years old initiative held by Roxane Varza, Mounia Arka, Audrey Soussan, and they started to highlight the need of having women as entrepreneurs, having women in the tech scene. And Sista's vision is more dedicated about raising money, because we believe the power is the money, and if you don't have the money, you don't have the power. And we believe that women, there is no you know, genome for entrepreneurship, and a woman can succeed as much as a man can, but we need to have the abilities. So we wanted to have this merge with Starter, you know, to just have one clear organization, one vision, and all together reduce the funding gap. And so Sista today is 3, I'd say, yes, 3 feet, if you 3 legs or whatever. One part is dedicated to entrepreneurs, to help them get knowledge about how to raise money, to network, to have the tips, you know, to understand how the VC's industry work. There's a second part that is Sista VC, because our vision is that we need to have more women in the VC industry, because we discovered that there is a clear link between the numbers of women VCs in a VC firm and the numbers of women who raise money from this VC firm. So we want Sista VC to be powerful and to highlight women. And there's a third party that Sista Datas, because we believe that we need to count women, we need to address the problem thanks to the data. So it's also a need for us to highlight the issues from the numbers.
How do you include men in this organization precisely?
Well, we have men who support our initiative. You are all aware that Gilles Babinet has been one of our main supporters, Cédric Aude, Ministry of Digital Economy. So we need men, but we need men who believe that women have, you know, their plates on the table.
Absolutely. Okay, congratulations on this anyway, Céline. That's so good. Kat, do you have, what can you highlight as an initiative from the French Tech to?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, for those in the public who aren't 100% aware of what the French Tech is, it's a general movement that brings together, you know, both government and civil society. My team in particular, you know, and our goal is, of course, to make sure that France becomes one of the best tech ecosystems in the world while having a positive impact you know, on its citizens. And, you know, my team is actually part of the special team inside the Macron administration. And, you know, when we were thinking about what are the ways that we could encourage diversity, especially considering that we do support quite a lot of, quite a lot of events and community initiatives like this one, we were thinking like, oh, you know, maybe we should develop content, maybe we should like encourage people to do it. We should, you know, take a stand, do speeches. And you know what, at the end they were like, you know what, screw it. Let's just demand it. So what we did is that we made sure that every single community event, every single initiative, every single like thing that we speak, sponsor, or participate in, and we're talking about quite a lot with a relatively extensive budget, we will not do any of that unless there's 35% of the speakers that are women. We're like, at some point, we just have to do it.
So
now.
you make women very visible, right? That's one thing.
We beyond that, I think what we're doing isn't so much that, it's like, we're just saying like, you know, this is the standard now. It's more than just pushing. It's like saying
it
like,
should be, but it's still not. I mean, we have many examples, unfortunately.
But I think like, you know, as you know, someone who's in government, if we don't set those standards, we don't hold people accountable to it, it's very difficult to otherwise follow, because then you're just talking about, then you have other mechanisms like, you know, influence and culture and norms and things like that, and everyone has to play their role, and this is the one that we needed to play. Like, if we can't hold ourselves to these standards, how are we going to expect everybody else to do so? And at the end of the day, what does a speech really ever do? And we've all done quite a few. So I think what's been really rewarding is that you know, when we put it in place a year ago, you know, at first we're like 35%, you know, we looked at the benchmark, right? The benchmark was definitely not 35%. You know, we looked at it and we remembered that, you know, we were speaking to the different partners that we had, they're all trying to find a way that they could make 35%. And some would call us and be like, hey, you know, we're kind of like at 30% right now. Would that be okay? Do you think that's, we'd be like, no. And the thing with this is that it's not just a policy, it's actually a legal binding part of the contract that these entities have with us, in which there is a clawback clause, which means that beyond the down payment, if you weren't able to meet the end, you know, if you weren't able to you know, have the 35%, then there's no reason why.
You're fine. No, you have.
Well, it's not you're fine. It's like, you know, we wanted to support events that were inclusive, and if you weren't one of these events and didn't think about it, then you're not exactly the kind of event that we want to support. And therefore, if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, we don't hold up ours, which, you know, kind of makes sense. And I think where it's been really useful isn't so much that we've done it, it's that we did it, and then a lot of other organizations, a lot of other people started following suit.
Good.
So
that's great.
I think there's a bit of that.
That's a good thing. But we do it in the US.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I want just to, you know, share my experience. based on Kat's feedback and policy, because the reason why I decided to be an entrepreneur is a woman, and her name is Oriane Garcia. I'm sure all of you know Oriane. And I was, I guess, 15 years old or 16 years old, and I was watching TV, and she was on M6, so a very popular TV
channel.
Yeah, exactly. And she was introducing our startup that was Caramel, so just a webmail. And I remember that I told myself, oh, I want to be her. I want to have her, you know, happiness, her power, her dreams. And it's really, I just identify myself to her. And I'm sure 100% if I've never seen Oriane Garcia on the TV, well, I would maybe never have even imagined I could be an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
So it's really important to have women in medias, in the events, because otherwise you can't identify yourself.
Exactly, great inspiration. And merci, Oriane. I'm sure she still has the same energy and smile and inspiration for us. And Claire, do you have... what are the effective initiatives that you've taken at the Consulat in New York?
Yeah, merci, Catherine. I think, you know, following on what Kat say, the role of the government is really to try to set standards. But as the representative of France in the US, of course, that's not my role. But we were trying to mobilize both local authorities to be, you know, sensitive to this issue, but also the business community. And considering the fact that in the US, it's much more the forces of the markets that, you know, in a way, set the standards for the economy. We decided to work with the investment community, and we were looking for the largest, forum to discuss with, and we created this great partnership with the Economic Club of New York, which really gathers, the largest firms in New York City and in the US to build this event that was really dedicated to investing in women. And we wanted to make the business case very clear, because it's not only that, you know, there is a question of innovation, there's a question of justice, but when you look at the figures, women-led startups completely outperform their peers. And there's an opportunity that is estimated at, you know, $4 trillion for investors to invest in this market. So there's a missed opportunity, and we really try to raise awareness among big players. So asset managers, big banks, but also institutional investors, talking with the pension funds in the US, and creating possibility for connection for women that were actually raising funds with all these major players. And we know how difficult it is for them to access those players. So we created, you know, occasion, mentoring opportunities, and gathering for them to meet with these actors and these players. And we also underlined the role played by the collectives such as CISA or Always. And I think it's really important for us to create bonds between, you know, France, Europe, and the US on this issue, because we see the same kind of movement, and we can really reinforce them by playing together. And maybe I can mention one thing, which I think for me is a real signal for hope. If you look at the crisis that we are in, and I think, as Kat said, it's very important to set this conversation in this the context we are living in. If you look at the markets and the way they have reacted, if you look at the ESG values, actually, if you look at the market, these ESG values have outperformed normal values on the market. So I think it's a clear signal that now investors believe that ESG is something that is solid, that they want to invest it, that they believe in, and they think can really, be something they can rely on. So we need to make the case that, investing in women is part of this ESG dynamic, and investor would be wise in investing in this part of the economy.
Agreed. So as time is flying, I would like to finish with the last question before going to the question from the audience. We have a lot on Facebook. I'm wondering today, what is your main focus now for the next month to really try to change these numbers? Just to give you what I am personally doing. and I'm continuing to invest. I believe that investing on this early stage level is really something that helps definitely. And I just would like to encourage every woman to do so, even small amounts of money. I really believe this makes a difference. Invest in women. And if you can't, just try to mentor them, because it's really powerful. Mentorship, you know, like two years ago, I was like, okay, mentoring, but I've measured here the immense impact that it has. And I see, Céline, what you're doing with Bold to encourage this. And it's exactly so. Either invest or mentor, but really we all have a huge responsibility on this. And the other thing is, I was thinking, many speakers during the week mentioned it, like namely Virginie Morgon, or even Michel Zatlid with Cloudflare, who went public. They said we need to be better at storytelling. We hear presenting this like closing the funding gap as a strong obligation, but we should put more fun into this. And I was thinking, why shouldn't we do like a Netflix series or something, you know, like more entertaining? That's what America taught me. If you want to change things, you have to make it fun. And maybe we could think about it like, you know, how like Silicon Valley was like a series, you know, Netflix series that was fun. Maybe we could do something happening in a VC fund that is, you know, held by a woman. But okay, invest, mentor, or maybe something more entertaining. What about your, and I'm gonna work on this probably. So what about your focus, guys? Ladies, what is your focus? Céline, what are you focusing on?
Yeah, no, I 100% share your view. I, at my stage, do investment, and of course, I don't only invest in women, but I have a true focus regarding women entrepreneurs. I have about a bit more than 30% of my investment were funded or co-funded by women. But I wanted to share with you the Sista Pledge, because on another level, I guess it's important for the audience to be aware about what we've done. In last October, we create a pledge with 15 recommendations addressed to VC firms in order to help them to have more women in their portfolios companies. And so there has been 80 VC firms who signed the pledge, and they promise that they will invest in 25% of women by 2025. So
wow.
within 5 years. And one of the recommendations is to have more women in the VC firm at all scales, you know, not only the analyst or junior position, but at all positions.
Partners. Yeah.
Of course, highlight women also, for example, to have, if you hire an expert, if you hire a consulting firm, well, choose women. It's easy. There's so much opportunity. So it's at all this, you know, all stage and all opportunities you can think about women.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you, Céline. Kat, do you?
Yeah,
what's
sure.
your
I mean,
focus today to make
yeah,
it different?
I guess there are a couple, right? There's the one with my official hat on, and I guess there's the one where I'm just, you know, kind of like a woman. With my official hat on, there are a couple of things that we've been thinking about. For those of you who have followed what the French government has been doing with startups in general, we first released a startup emergency relief plan.
Kat, you should speak up louder. I'm not sure we hear you well.
Right. Sorry. How about now? Is this better?
Of course.
Yeah, great. So for those of you who may have been following what French government has been doing with startups as a whole, in March, we launched a emergency relief program with 4 billion in it. As of today, just this morning, actually, our Minister for Economy and Finance and our State Secretary for Digital Affairs announced a top up of 1.2 billion. And you know, so just to give you an idea, last year, the entire French tech ecosystem as a whole raised 5 billion. And right now we're talking about pledges and support that already go over that initial number. So one thing that we are thinking about as we're preparing the third wave, which is going to be on the structural measures, is like, well, you know, it makes sense that we're standing up for our ecosystem and we're there for them, but what are some of the things that we should ask for back? what are some of the things that we should demand, and what is the best, most constructive way to do that? And these are conversations that, you know, we're opening and we're starting to have right now. And hopefully, you know, these are things that will be submitted to government for, you know, decisions at a ministerial level for the general rebound plan that the president will be announcing in the fall. A second thing is that we have a series of grants, actually, which we call the French Tech Community Fund, which are used to fund a lot of grassroots initiatives from our 114 French Tech communities all around the world. And one of the priorities this year will be talent and diversity. And so we're going to be encouraging, and I'm looking at Catherine and Anne-Claire, and I'm 100% sure that you already have 100 things in the pipeline for that one. But yeah, we want to see more events like this, more projects like this, things that really move the needle forward, and an entire diversity of different ways of going about it, moving forward. And then I guess as the person, like, I mean, you know, something, you know, I guess one slight difference that you'll also have between French people and Americans, I consider myself definitely, my accent is misleading, but I'm definitely more French than American, never lived in the US, is that French people are not inclined to public speaking. And a lot of the women in France have been culturally trained over such a long period of time to hold themselves to such hold ourselves to such a high level of perfection that we never think that we could possibly be a role model because we're not good enough, or we haven't raised enough money, or we haven't made it, or I mean, we haven't closed this or those deals.
Yeah. So ancient. I mean, to me, it's like it refers to like we should find new wording. I mean, we lack of vocabulary to make this.
For sure. But I think something that I do and that I encourage, you know, everyone else to do is that every time you find a woman who is inspiring and who's amazing, and you feel like people are missing out because they haven't heard her story, you know, you should definitely encourage them to speak. So we try to sort of keep a roster, because we do sponsor quite a lot of events, and make sure that, you know, as we build a speakers bureau, we're making sure that there's adequate representation of women, but also we just actively seek out really great people with really diverse stories that, you know, don't necessarily go into the cookie cutter approach of what, you know, what a standard successful woman in tech looks like, and that can sort of share that as well. Yeah.
And Claire, what would you say that your focus is, as you know?
No, I would completely concur with what the three of you have said. I think we need to be positive, and we need to, you know, build a better storytelling for women in tech. And I think that's part of what Kat was just saying about role model, and, you know, bringing more visibility to women also in the media. And we've seen that in the media, when you talk about economy, there's so very few women that we can identify. So I think there's a lot of work to do there. The French government has launched a mission to work on the women's visibility in the media. So I think it should look at, you know, tech, the economy, etc. And then I think we need to find ways and means, just like with Sisters, to create great partnership between government and the private sector. We need to set standards, and we need to hold people accountable to these standards. And I think this is both the responsibility of governments and the market to do so. So I hope we will move forward on this direction.
Yeah, and we will, for sure. So just for you to know, we have like more than 15 questions on Facebook. I'm not sure we have time to answer them all, but there are many about diversity, all diversities. People are saying, okay, can you shift the conversation from women to diversity? We agree. Mm-hmm. Why aren't men invited at this table? It's true. We should have invited a man here. Next time, I promise we will. Will all Raise and Sista cooperate one day? Well, we hope. Celine, what do you think? Yeah, that's a good question. Should we impose quotas to make things, to accelerate things? Maybe we could stop a second on this, but that's something. It helps for corporate governance and women on board in France, as you know, but should we
absolutely, and maybe I can comment on that, Kat, because I think, you know, we have seen quotas have been very much criticized, and I know they're very far away from the mindset we find here in the United States. Yes. But if you look at the situation on boards, and if you look at, you know, if you compare France with the UK or Canada or the US, so all these countries were, you know, 10 years ago, approximately in between 19 and 20% of women on boards. And France passed a law for quotas, and now we are leading the way in the Western world with 42% of women on boards. So it's, you know, it's not even been 10 years, and we have doubled the number of women on boards. And I think this is really shifting the industry.
It's working.
And it works.
It's
And if you
artificial,
look at,
but it works, right?
absolutely. And if you look at countries where, you know, no quotas have been put in place, and, you know, people rely on the forces of the market for change, I mean, we are exactly at the same point than 10 years ago. So it hasn't worked. And so we need, I think, incentives from the government to move forward. And, you know, we need people to be made accountable of those.
Absolutely. So I hope next year we have the same conversation with men at the table, and we have better figures both in the US and both in France. And okay, so thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today to this conversation. It was a pleasure. I encourage you to stay with us, because in 20 minutes we have a great art masterclass just to help us think differently and look at the world differently. It's going to be a lot of fun. And again, Céline, Kat, and Claire, thank you so much. And à bientôt.
Bye bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Bye.
Merci,
Bye.
Catherine. Bye bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye.